Okay, now that we've started Max for the first time, we've gotten through the very basics of customization and how to set it up in a very basic mode. Let's take a closer look at the preferences area. I'm not going to make any changes here, we're just going to get familiar with them. We've already had a small play in the general card of the preference settings area, and what we really changed there was the icon size for the toolbars. As you can see, there's a lot of areas here. And as you get more familiar with 3D Studio Max, you'll be able to turn some of these off, like the tooltips. If you feel that they're soaking up too much systems resources, or they just annoy you, you can simply turn them off or leave them on. The auto play preview file, this can become quite annoying. And again, as we learn about autoplay preview files, we will make a decision whether to leave that on or turn it off. And there's a few more throughout here that we will play with throughout this training CD. So let's just take a close look over here at system unit scale. Now, I live in a country where we have a metric unit scale and not an imperial unit scale. So I like to use meters as my default unit type. Now this is complete personal preference. It really doesn't make all that much of a difference inside 3D Studio Max unless you're modeling something that needs accuracy, in which case 3D Studio Max probably isn't the package you should be using. We'll talk more about these areas down here, about origin and so on, further through the CD. The level of undos in your scene, by default it's 20. You can set that to whatever your needs will be, but 20 is probably more than enough. Reference coordinate systems, we will talk about these later on in 3D Studio. Whether 3D Studio is going to load its plugins on startup, this is recommended. Submaterials, assigned automatically. At the moment this setting really doesn't mean all that much to us, and we'll leave it on for now. Scene selection, how your scene is going to behave, whether it's right, left crossings, left, right crossings. We'll get to talk about these a little later on. The next card along is rendering. Now this has to do with the output. In 3D Studio Max, your aim is to make an animation that in the end will either go out to be an AVI to be played back on computer, streamed over the web, or even put out to videotape or film, depending on what the purpose is. Now, a few areas we're going to have to look at is what kind of output you're going to be having, whether it's going to be to NTSC or PAL. Now these have to do with video, and these are the two major standards. How your scene's going to do its video color checking. Again, different needs will determine what type of video color checking you use. Your output dither. Your fields. Your fields are closely related to whether you're using NTSC or PAL. And again, this will be controlled by the output needs. Now the rest of these areas down here really aren't used that often, and we'll come back later and have a look at these. Next card along is inverse kinematics. Now this has to do with character animation or kinematics animation, and we won't be using this area very much at all. Next card along has to do with animation. We're talking general animation here, not character animation. How your key bracket display is going to work. The locate center during animation, whether that's going to be activated. Whether you're going to be using any sound plugins. And how your controllers are going to be defined. Again, we probably won't play with this area at all. Next card up is Max Scripting. We're not going to touch on this area at all in this CD. Just be aware that it's here, and this is where you control the preferences for your Max Scripting. Okay, next card along is viewports, and we'll probably end up playing with this quite a lot. But for now, we're just going to gloss over it. Just take a look at this area here, display drivers. Here it tells you what the current display drivers are. In my case, when we first started 3D Studio Max, I chose the OpenGL drivers. The next area along is gamma. Now this is a gamma correction, depending on your needs and your monitor's needs. You may not need to change this. In my case, I'm going to leave it the way it is. Okay, the next area along is probably the one of most interest, and that's the files area. This is the area where we set up, say, our autosaves, our incremental saves, whether we can compress on our saves, whether we're going to include a thumbnail image in our saves, and whether we're going to have any file messages. We can control the duration between our auto backups and the number of incremental backups. We can control the log file maintenance. We can control input options here, i.e. zoom on extents or on import, and what kind of archiving tool we're going to be using when we archive our files off. What's of most interest here is the file handling and the automatic backup. Now I recommend that you do set this, and I even recommend that you actually use incremental saves, because it gives you the option to go back to a file that may have slightly different models in it that you were using earlier on during your model creation. And I don't recommend using a 5-minute backup increment. I like to set mine more to say 15. Again, this is a personal preference. Okay, that's all we're going to look at the moment for preferences. We will get into this preference area a little bit later on.